Our next film is called Anora by Sean Baker, and it talks about a Brooklyn stripper who begins a relationship with the son of a very wealthy Russian oligarch. I personally really like the film. I'm very curious to see what you guys think.
Yeah, so I think the first thing to say is that obviously this is actually a re-release. Anora did come out a few months ago, but now because it's up for a bunch of awards, it's having a big sort of second cinematic release. So if you did miss it the first time around, listen, go and see it. Make sure you've seen all of those 10 Best Picture nominees. Now, I have to say, I really rated this. I like Sean Baker. I think he's a really interesting director. I think my favourite film of his thus far is Tangerine, which I think is just fab, but we'll talk about that another time. And this I thought was really fabulous. This film wasn't what I expected it to be. So Mikey Madison plays the titular character. She goes by Annie, and she works as a stripper, she works as an escort. And when she falls in with Ivan, who is, as you mentioned, Alex, the son of a very wealthy Russian oligarch, it seems like she is living the dream. Suddenly, she has access to wealth beyond her wildest imagination. She has a kind of burgeoning relationship, which is fun. You know, Ivan is nice. You know, I think he's exactly what she needs in that he's very easy. He's very easy breezy. She doesn't need to work hard with him. And indeed, from the moment that we meet her, Anora is in control. You know, she's expert at her job. You know, we see her at the beginning being wildly popular with customers, and all the way through the film, like, she is this very commanding presence. She's very sure of herself. She's very strong. And all of that gets challenged when Ivan's parents hear that Anora and Ivan have secretly gotten married. And suddenly, kind of all hell breaks loose. And for me, I thought that as far as awards go, we've been talking about it in respect to I'm Still Here. Mikey Madison, I think, has got this attention because of how her character then is put under this sort of intense pressure, this intense stress. There are incredible sequences which are very comedic as well as being quite genuinely disturbing at times, you know, where she is then basically being bullied and manipulated and essentially abducted by people who work for this sinister oligarch. I thought that she manages to actually do so much with this character who, while being really strong on the outside, you know, you get to see her inner vulnerability, you get to understand her personality, all without, you know, the shell necessarily breaking. I think Sean Baker is such a good director. He famously takes a kind of very research-led approach to his films. And so it's a really good film, is basically the upshot of it. I think it's really excellent. It's funny, it's gripping, it's moving, it's really well made. I think that there's fantastic use of colour all the way throughout. It's kind of studded with this sort of deep red that at times, you know, you're like, oh, you know, it's sort of evoking passion, it's evoking lust. At other times, it's evoking vulnerability. I just think it's phenomenally well made. And I think it's so nice to see Sean Baker, who I think, you know, has always been very celebrated, but perhaps I think is maybe a little underappreciated. Really get something so mainstream with this one. So yeah, I really liked it. I have one big quibble that I'd like to throw to you guys. How did you feel about the use of Take That tonight? I don't know what it's called. Today This Could Be.
Firstly, I'll say I loved the film. Absolutely loved it in every aspect, because it feels like two films stitched together, but neatly stitched together. A sort of fantasy film and then a reality film. Greatest Day. I actually adored the use of the song because I thought, well, a lot of the film takes place over one long extended day. There's a lot of montage throughout the sort of first half of the film, and then the second half, as I said, it clearly is quite distinct where the separation comes. That takes place over a very long extended day and night, so a full 24 hours practically. And the song therefore has this tongue-in-cheek humor to it, that today this could be the greatest day of our lives. And it's, you know, it's that typical sense you use something which is usually used for great jubilation, but display it over scenes of stripping, and then also scenes of youth, marriage, and in a term, stupidity and recklessness, I see. And it's sort of the dance remix of this song. I think it's used quite effectively because as Brits, you know, we hear Take That And we're like, oh, that's an interesting use.
I wondered if it was slightly, deliberately naff, because with all the love to take that, I think it is definitely a song that we think of as being, it's a bit naff, particularly in the year 2025. And I wondered if, it was kind of being used to sort of undermine the glamour of sometimes what we're seeing, because I think the film does a good job of kind of juxtaposing the glamour and the grit and the grime.
I agree. I think it is supposed to have this saccharine sweet, because the first half of the film is saccharine sweet when the two characters are falling for each other in a term. I think what this film really solidifies, because I actually was enjoying that quite fantasy bit. It's quite nice. Young love is quite fun to watch. It's Romeo and Juliet. It's quite engaging, and the two actors were brilliant. You could see why they would so rapidly fall in love with each other, like an avalanche, a snowballing effect. But the real kicker, when this film became not only good but excellent to me, is when that second half kicks in, when chaos ensues, when hijinks ensue. It becomes so much more than it was. You really see Mikey Madison deservedly winning the BAFTA, in my opinion, for such a nuanced, fabulous performance for someone so young. I think that what really works in this film is the comedy, and what really works is just how daring it is. It really is quite a daring film. It is hilarious. It was almost like the bumbling Home Alone characters were the big villainous henchmen who sort of show up, but it had a beauty, a sweetness to some of the performances as well, which really shows throughout the film. But it is absolutely stone cold hilarious. It's just so absurd. But then when Mikey Madison is such a good performer that she is able to rein that back in when it needs to be. Because it's been around a while and this is a re-release, I knew it had some of these twists and turns. So I was sort of expecting it to show up, but I never expected it to be so good.
What I was going to say is I really liked Anora. I love Sean Banker. I was just really hooked. I think everyone's just amazing in it. I love the young Russian actor. It looks so natural. It looks like they're just being themselves. And the ironic thing is, I don't think they are. It looks like Sean Baker found an actor who just happens to be that way, who would happen to react that way. Maybe someone who works as a sex worker who's so comfortable. And it's quite shocking to realize that they're not. And that just means they did a brilliant job. You just believe it. My thing with Anora that got me hooked is the whole time, I don't know why I was thinking of stakes. Like, what's in it for them? That's the only thing that was in my mind. It's not necessarily a criticism or a bad thing, but I was just thinking, if it all goes bad for Anora, I don't feel that bad for her. The stakes aren't that big. That was the only thing I was thinking. And then it's only in the end that we realize that I think for Anora, it's more of an emotional thing. The whole time it feels like, okay, the stakes is she wants to, sponge as much as she can from the marriage, from the situation. So she leaves that scenario with a fun experience and the money that she deserves as a wife. There's more than that to it. And maybe if that was planted a bit earlier, I would have been more hooked. Like, oh, there's more at stake. Maybe it would have hooked me in a different way earlier on if I saw it coming somehow.
I think that's absolutely right. I think that the way I understood it was about a performance. Her performance is showing us that actually the character of Anora, the character of Annie, is actually a front. It's actually rare in the film that I think we get a glimpse into her true self, because she's constantly presenting a version of herself, be that to attract clients, be that to protect herself in situations where she's being threatened. Even I think in sequences, I think that we are seeing her in survival mode, and what she does best is fake it. And actually, I think this kind of ties into the relationship, and specifically the sexual relationships that we see in the film. This isn't a film in which kind of her pleasure is at any point prioritized or particularly represented. And so actually, for me, I think that final scene in which you see everything crack open, that I think is the curtains falling away. We're able to actually understand who she is. Her soul is actually bared in that sequence. And I think that because it is all the way through the film the case that she is kind of putting up a facade, when you see that kind of crumble down and you see, oh, okay, wow, she is this really strong character, but she has these kind of inner vulnerabilities. That to me made sense, and it made me kind of appreciate, okay, yeah, this person is doing a performance all the time.
Well, I thought that actually there were a few more gaps and cracks that you saw earlier in the film, and I think that's what really connected me to the character so much, is that actually when the inciting incident happens and they do decide to get married, that's not something, I mean, you could say that she wants the mass financial gain, But it's more, I guess, that someone actually looks at her in a far fresher set of eyes. You know, she's got these dead-eyed men that she's stripping for every night, or in her escort business who she has to deal with there. But Vanya, or Ivan, he's so vibrant, full of energy. You can see how she could also be suckered in by his energy, and why she might actually crack a bit and actually let go her professionalism to a way to actually get married and let go of her job. You know, a very steady income for her, you know, not as glamorous as the billion-dollar mansion that they live in, but, you know, there's the elements that she does want that comfort when she's laying on him when she's playing video games, and she looks very sad because she wants more of comfort from him, because that's what she wants to connect with. She's a human being after all, and that's what really sells it for me. And yes, she does crack at the end, but I think that, you know, the film is such a great demonstration of how people with boundless wealth can just destroy lives carelessly and recklessly. It's about recklessness on the side of abusing people who are not in the position, you know, the people who do not have the financial ability to do the same things. And, you know, it's almost like, you know, she's thrown away and she's had to deal with this her whole life as a sex worker and as a stripper. She really has to face that. And when she finally opens up a little bit to this young and sort of vibrant, burning candle burnt on every single end, that is the young Ivan, when he just throws her away, or seemingly throws her away, it's even more devastating. That's why she's so adamant to try and get it back. Maybe it's just because she's a great performer. Maybe I'm suckered in. But I think it's genuinely because she thought that, oh, this is my chance to have more than just, you know, better money, of course, but also a better life with someone who just sees me beyond just the sex object. But then later on you realize that, you know, the real devastation, the real drama of this highly comedic film, the real drama comes from the fact that she is seen as worthless again by someone she thought that she might be able to trust, and then is cracked wide open. I think, wow, what a fantastic performance, because it has those little breadcrumbs, and I really saw it. I know that you guys might have felt a little more disconnected, but I really connected with the character, because you do have a look. You don't just see her at the strip club. You don't just see her performing her escorting duty. You do see her at home when she's completely vulnerable, only briefly, but I think it's so necessary. There's a choice that's been made to show her there, because we can see what she looks like when she's away from the performance, and that you can relate to some of her moments when she's with Vanya.
Jake, you kind of convinced me there. I think it's just because these moments of vulnerability and her seeking connection are so subtle that the premise of the film seems to be more about her trying to make this deal work. And I think the treasure in the film is her seeking connection, is her real goal, that in the end she kind of is again tossed to the side. That might be overlooked, I'm thinking, by some audiences, you know, but I think maybe that's the beauty of it as well, that it's something subtle that one would think as an audience, oh, her objective here, like, what does she want? She wants to make the most of this marriage. She wants to leave with a lot of money, and maybe that's not what she's actually in for.
It's so interesting that the film does have that ambiguity, like it isn't set in stone. But I think that's because, like life, there are blurry edges and you never quite know what people are thinking. I like the fact that it doesn't kind of have such clean-cut lines and that it is kind of open to that interpretation. I agree with you, Jake. I didn't mean to suggest that I think that she's performing a character and we see nothing of her until the end. And I think it's been very interesting to see the response as well from sex workers. I've read a number of responses that have responded very positively to it, in feeling that, you know, it's much more of a kind of matter-of-fact look at sex work. This is not a film that's interested in any judgments either way, and it's not a film that's actually interested in kind of making a spectacle out of it. So I think that speaks to that kind of almost documentarian aesthetic that a lot of Sean Baker movies have, where he's just done such a good job. And this applies to Mikey Madison as well, who I know did a terrific amount of preparation for the role, going to strip clubs, speaking to escorts, all of this kind of stuff to make the whole thing rounded. And as a result, you just get this, I think, this brilliant slice of life where you're afforded a peek, and I think it is often just a peek into all of these people's lives, all of these snapshots. But because it's such a vivid peek, you can fill in all of the blanks. So even though you have these kind of slightly blurred lines where you're not entirely sure what people's motivations are or necessarily how certain people are feeling in different scenes, you're sort of able to fill it in because the inner life feels so rich and so real. So I think it's really, really impressive. I have to say, I don't think that Mikey Madison is going to win Best Actress. But just to sort of touch on awards before we finish, I was very pleased to see, I think, Yura Borisov, a guy who plays Igor, has also been nominated for Best Supporting Actor, which now I've seen the film, I'm pleasantly surprised by, because, I mean, he gives an absolutely great performance, but it feels like a role that would often be overlooked. You know, he manages to make it sort of sweet and funny and endearing, while also being this sort of, you know, slightly stern, slightly scary, but maybe slightly tragic figure. So I have to say, delighted by that as well.
When I saw this name in the credits, I was like, oh, and I'm so glad it was. There's a lot of performances in this movie that are over the top in a great way. Like, not too much. Like, you can believe people are like that, but, you know, when people in real life get over the top, not, oh, that doesn't seem realistic. Very realistic shows of excess emotion, excess anger, excess frustration, excess ennui, you know, all these great things. It's so hilarious. The cavalcade of characters it brings together is very funny, but Igor as a character is so understated, but also the emotional through line, and it's such a nice thing to do, to make evil henchmen the emotional through line of the entire film. And so, yeah, I'd highly recommend this movie. I'm so glad it got a re-release, because people should check it out. It deserves it. I think it will make a good amount of money on this re-release. As I said, it was absolutely packed when I went to see it. It's definitely a great film. It's not a Bora, it's Anora. It's very fun, basically.